What happens when desperation collides with opportunity at 200 miles per hour on hockey's biggest stage? Right now, the Toronto Maple Leafs stand at a crossroads that could define the next decade of this storied franchise. And I'm not talking about some minor roster tweak or depth acquisition. I'm talking about a seismic, earth-shattering blockbuster that would send shockwaves from Vancouver to Toronto and everywhere in between. TSN analyst Brian Hayes just threw gasoline on the fire by suggesting the Leafs should trade Matthew Knies, their 22-year-old power forward with legitimate top-line potential, along with a king's ransom of draft picks and prospects, all for one player, Quinn Hughes. Yes, that Quinn Hughes, the Vancouver Canucks captain, the reigning Norris Trophy finalist, arguably the most dynamic defenseman in the National Hockey League today. And here's the kicker that makes this whole situation absolutely bonkers. The Canucks are drowning at the bottom of the standings, and the Leafs, well, they're not exactly lighting the world on fire either. So, let me ask you this. Is trading your entire future for 18 months of brilliance the move of a championship-caliber organization making a calculated power play? Or is it the last gasp of a franchise that's lost its way, grasping at straws while the ship takes on water? Buckle up, because we're about to dissect one of the most controversial trade proposals of the season, and trust me, this one's going to get heated. Let's establish the baseline here, because if you're going to understand why this conversation even exists, you need to appreciate exactly what Quinn Hughes brings to the table. At 26 years old, Hughes isn't just in his prime. He's operating at a level that maybe 5 defensemen in the entire league can match. Through 18 games this season, he's already accumulated 21 points with 2 goals and 19 assists. But raw numbers don't tell the whole story with a player like Hughes. Watch him for 5 minutes, and you'll see something special. His skating ability is absolutely elite, the kind of effortless, fluid movement that makes NHL forwards look like they're skating through mud. His hockey IQ borders on precognitive. He sees plays developing 3 steps ahead of everyone else on the ice. His puck distribution is surgical, and his ability to transition from defense to offense, it's like watching a Formula One car accelerate out of a corner while everyone else is still hitting the brakes. Hughes is currently in year 5 of a 6-year, $47.1 million contract extension he signed back in 2021, a deal that looks like highway robbery in today's inflated market where mediocre defensemen are commanding $6 to $7 million annually. He's scheduled to hit unrestricted free agency in the summer of 2027, which brings us to the elephant in the room that makes this entire situation so complicated. Everyone, and I mean everyone, in hockey circles expects Hughes to eventually join his brothers Jack and Luke with the New Jersey Devils when that free agency window opens. It's the family reunion narrative that practically writes itself. 3 Hughes brothers, all elite NHL players, all on the same team. It's the kind of story that sports networks would cover for months, which means any team trading for Quinn Hughes right now is essentially acquiring an 18-month rental. A phenomenally talented, game-changing rental, but a rental nonetheless. Now let's talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs, because this is where the proposal goes from intriguing to absolutely wild. Through 22 games this season, the Leafs have been nothing short of catastrophic. They're languishing near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, a position that feels almost impossible given the offensive firepower on this roster. Auston Matthews, one of the premier goal scorers in hockey. William Nylander producing at an elite level. John Tavares defying father time with consistent veteran excellence. On paper, this team should be battling for the Atlantic Division crown. In reality, they're fighting just to stay in the playoff conversation. The defensive core has been exposed repeatedly. The goaltending has been inconsistent at best, and the overall team structure looks fragile under any kind of sustained pressure. The same old story that's haunted this franchise through years of playoff disappointments. But here's where Brian Hayes' proposal shifts from crazy to calculated. The Maple Leafs aren't actually a rebuilding team. Despite the horrific start, this roster is too talented, too experienced, and frankly too expensive to simply blow up and start over. The core is locked in. The window, while perhaps narrower than it was a few years ago, is still very much open. Matthews is 28. Nylander is 29. These are players in their absolute prime years. Championship windows don't stay open forever. Just ask the Washington Capitals, the Pittsburgh Penguins, or any other franchise that watched their window slam shut before they could capitalize. When Hayes suggests that if the Leafs were really rocking right now, he'd trade Matthew Knies plus picks and prospects for Hughes without hesitation, he's not speaking from panic. He's speaking from a place of ruthless, calculated aggression. He's recognizing that sometimes you have to take massive swings to break through the barriers that have held you back for decades. Let's game this out logically, because there's actually a compelling argument here that goes beyond desperation. What would Quinn Hughes bring to Toronto that they desperately lack? Elite puck-moving ability from the back end. The Maple Leafs have struggled for years to find a defenseman who can consistently transition the puck with both speed and precision. Morgan really has been solid, a reliable veteran presence, but let's be honest, he's not Quinn Hughes. Nobody in Toronto's current defensive stable possesses the combination of skating, vision, and offensive instincts that Hughes brings every single shift. Power play dominance. Hughes is a legitimate game changer on the man advantage, the kind of quarterback who can run an entire system through his decision-making. Toronto's power play has been maddeningly inconsistent throughout the Matthews era. Imagine what it could become with Hughes controlling the point, feeding pucks to Matthews, Nylander, and Marner in prime scoring positions. We're talking about a potential top 3 power play unit in the entire league. Playoff credibility. Fair or not, the Maple Leafs carry the burden of repeated postseason failures like a scarlet letter. Adding a player of Hughes' caliber, a legitimate Norris Trophy contender and team captain, sends an unmistakable message to the rest of the league. This organization is serious about winning now. Consequences be damned. The perfect fit for this roster's timeline. This is perhaps the most compelling argument. If you're Brad Treliving, you're looking at Matthews and Nylander in their prime years right now. You're watching Tavares continue to produce at a high level, but you know that window won't last forever. You need to maximize this moment, and Hughes represents the exact type of transformational talent that could elevate this team from perennial playoff participant to legitimate Stanley Cup contender. Hayes put it bluntly, that's how good Quinn Hughes is, and he's absolutely right. This isn't about trading for a solid top 4 defenseman or a reliable veteran presence. This is about acquiring one of the 5 best defensemen in the world, a player who changes the entire complexion of your lineup the moment he steps on the ice. But let's not sugarcoat the reality of what this would require, because the price tag would be absolutely staggering. Matthew Knies isn't some throw-in prospect or organizational depth piece. He's a 22-year-old power forward who's shown legitimate top 6 potential, the exact type of young, cost-controlled asset that teams covet in today's salary cap era. Trading him would mean sacrificing a player who could be a cornerstone piece for the next decade. Then you add the draft picks, likely multiple first-rounders, and top prospects from an already depleted farm system. The Maple Leafs would essentially be betting everything on the next 2 seasons, gambling that Hughes' addition would be the catalyst that finally delivers the championship that's eluded this franchise since 1967. And here's the uncomfortable variable nobody wants to discuss openly. What if Hughes still leaves in 2027? What if the family reunion in New Jersey is inevitable and Toronto is simply a 2-year stopover on his way to joining Jack and Luke? You'd be left with a depleted prospect pool, missing draft picks, and the same old questions about whether this core can actually win when it matters most. That's the nightmare scenario that has to keep management up at night. The possibility that you mortgage the future, sacrifice young talent, and still come up empty when the final buzzer sounds. Here's where we separate emotional reactions from strategic thinking, because there's another way to look at this entire situation. Yes, the Maple Leafs are currently struggling. Yes, trading significant assets when you're near the bottom of the standings feels counterintuitive, maybe even reckless. But consider this alternative perspective. Toronto isn't going to rebuild. The financial commitments, the fan expectations, the pressure from ownership, none of it allows for a multi-year teardown. This team will find a way to stabilize, to climb back into playoff contention, because the talent level demands it. The question isn't whether they'll be competitive again. It's whether they'll have the pieces necessary to actually win when the games matter most. And that's where Hughes changes everything. Imagine a defensive core anchored by a legitimate #1 defenseman who can play 25-plus minutes a night against the opposition's best players while still driving offense. Imagine the matchup flexibility that provides head coach Craig Berube. Imagine the confidence that permeates through the entire lineup when you know you have that kind of game-breaking talent on the back end. The Canucks are going nowhere fast, sitting at the absolute bottom of the NHL standings with a roster that needs significant retooling. General Manager Patrick Allvin can say all he wants about Hughes being untouchable, but when you're in that position, everything has to be on the table. The return for Hughes would be massive, potentially franchise-altering for Vancouver. And it would give them the assets necessary to properly rebuild around their younger core. So, where does this leave us? Should Brad Treliving pick up the phone, call Patrick Allvin, and start the conversation about what it would take to bring Quinn Hughes to Toronto? Not necessarily, because the Maple Leafs should definitely make this trade right now. The timing might not be perfect given their current struggles. But because you have to explore every avenue when a player of this caliber becomes available. You have to do your due diligence. You have to understand what the cost would be and whether it aligns with your championship timeline. If Toronto can stabilize over the next few weeks, if they can climb back into legitimate playoff contention and demonstrate that this early season disaster was an aberration rather than a true reflection of this team's capabilities, then the Hughes conversation becomes not just interesting, but potentially essential. Because here's the ultimate truth that Brian Hayes understands and that every Maple Leafs fan needs to grapple with. Championship windows close faster than you think. Matthews won't be in his prime forever. Nylander's best years are happening right now. Tavares is defying age, but that won't last indefinitely. If you believe this core can win, and the talent suggests they absolutely can, then you have to be willing to make the bold, uncomfortable moves that separate contenders from champions. Trading Matthew Knies, multiple first-round picks, and top prospects for 18 months of Quinn Hughes would be one of the biggest gambles in franchise history. It would be a statement that winning now matters more than protecting the future. It would be the kind of all-in move that either delivers a Stanley Cup parade down Yonge Street or becomes a cautionary tale about desperation masquerading as ambition. But you know what? Maybe that's exactly the kind of bold, aggressive move this franchise needs. Maybe after decades of playing it safe, of making incremental improvements, of hoping the core would eventually figure it out, it's time to swing for the fences and deal with the consequences later. Quinn Hughes might be the perfect player at the perfect time for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Whether Brad Treliving has the courage to pursue him remains the most compelling question of this season. The hockey world is watching, and Toronto's next move could define this entire era of Maple Leafs hockey. What's your take on this blockbuster proposal? Would you pull the trigger on trading Knies and the farm for 18 months of Quinn Hughes' brilliance? Or is this the kind of short-sighted move that haunts franchises for a generation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear the passionate arguments on both sides of this debate. And if this analysis got you thinking differently about Toronto's championship window, hit that like button and let's keep this conversation rolling. This is the kind of decision that separates the bold from the cautious, and I have a feeling we're just getting started.